Hey friends, Bone Daddy here. Hope you've had a great week. Welcome to the second episode of Stories to Tell in the Boneyard. Let me first say a huge thank you to everyone listening. I'm so thankful to be able to share these stories that are rolling around in my brain pan with the world at large. If you continue to enjoy these little side quests into the darker corners of my imagination, please like and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. This week I've been cooking up another great tale of the weird and macabre for you. Humans are social creatures by nature, but sometimes even social creatures need to escape the intensity of city life and just get away. You can call it a mental or emotional reset. You can call it a quick weekend getaway, but whatever you call it, it boils down to the same thing, a time to get away from the pressure cooker that is city life and ultimately get away from all the other people. That's exactly what Cal Miller had in mind when he boarded a bus headed out to the desert. A little time to decompress, clear his thoughts, and recharge his emotional battery. But as you, my loyal listeners, are about to find out, he got far more solitude than he planned for. So, climb on board, take a seat on the bus, and enjoy the ride. At least while you still can.
The Vanishing Bus by Jason Connor. Read by Claude Arthur. The city was a cacophony of gray concrete and screaming sirens, but inside the bus, it felt like a pressurized capsule of human anticipation. Calvin Miller, whose friends called him Cal, sat in seat 12C, his shoulder pressed against the vibrating plastic wall of the bus. He liked the window seat. It allowed him to watch the world peel away. The bus was packed. It was one of those midday departures where the air is thick with the smell of damp wool, stale coffee, and the faint metallic tang of old air conditioning. There were 40 and change passengers in total, a cross-section of desperate and hopeful souls heading toward the arid stretch of the high desert. Cal watched a woman across the aisle. She was elderly, wearing a bright saffron-colored cardigan and clutching a leather handbag to her chest like it contained the secrets of the universe. She was humming something low and melodic, her eyes fixed on the blurring skyline of the city as they began their ascent toward the highway. The interior of the bus was a symphony of small, mundane sounds. There was the rhythmic hiss-click of the pneumatic suspension, the soft murmur of conversations blending into a collective hum, and the occasional sharp burst of laughter from the back. The air felt heavy but comfortable, filled with the shared energy of people in transition, all suspended between where they had been and where they were going. Cal shifted in his seat, glancing at the man beside him, a burly guy in a flannel shirt who was currently wrestling with a crossword puzzle. "Heading far?" Cal asked, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. The man looked up and grinned, showing a slightly crooked front tooth. "All the way to the edge of the basin," he replied. "Visiting my sister. It's been 3 years since I've seen her. You?" "Just heading out to clear my head," Cal answered with a small smile. The city was getting too loud. The man nodded in agreement, returning to his puzzle with a focused intensity. While further down the aisle, 2 teenagers whispered and giggled over a shared pair of earbuds, their heads leaning toward one another in a bubble of adolescent confidence. For the first 45 minutes or so of the journey, everything felt perfectly ordinary. The bus surged forward, leaving the skyscrapers behind, and the passengers settled into the steady rhythm of the journey. There was a comforting predictability to it all, the way the light shifted across the seats, the gentle sway of the vehicle, and the feeling that everyone was exactly where they were supposed to be. But that's when reality started to slowly slip away. Cal looked away for a moment to check his watch. It was 2:14 p.m. When he looked back at the seat across from him, the woman in the saffron cardigan was gone. He didn't mean she had gotten off, they were still cruising at 60 miles per hour. He didn't mean she had stepped into the aisle, the seat was simply empty. Not just empty of a person, but empty of everything. There was no leather handbag left behind, no stray thread from her cardigan, not even a lingering scent of lavender perfume. It was as if the space she occupied had been vacuumed clean by an invisible force. Cal blinked, his heart giving a small, erratic thump against his ribs. He looked at the man sitting next to him, the burly guy in the flannel shirt who was now snoring softly, his crossword puzzle forgotten on his lap. "Excuse me," Cal whispered, leaning over. "Did that lady just get up?" The man woke with a start, blinking sleepily. He looked at the empty seat across from Cal and then back at him, looking confused. "What lady?" the man asked. Cal frowned. "The woman in the saffron cardigan. She was right there, with the handbag." The man shrugged, his voice thick with sleep. "I don't know what you're talking about, kid. It's just been the 2 of us in this row since we left the station." Cal felt a prickle of cold sweat on the back of his neck. He paused, his mind racing to backtrack. He didn't just think he had seen her, he could still feel the image of her seared into his retinas, the vivid, electric yellow of that saffron cardigan and the way she had clutched her handbag like a lifeline. He remembered the specific low frequency of her humming, a sound that felt less like music and more like a heartbeat for the bus. He wasn't dreaming, he wasn't hallucinating from some sudden bout of heat stroke or city-induced stress. She had been there, a concrete presence in seat 13C, occupying space and breathing air. But as he looked at the flannel-shirted man, who was now looking at him with a mixture of pity and confusion, Cal felt a prickle of existential dread. It wasn't just that the woman had vanished, it was that the fact of her entire existence had been deleted from the world for everyone but him. The contradiction gnawed at him. If the man beside him had been staring right across the aisle, how could he have missed a woman in a bright yellow sweater? It felt as if Cal were holding a secret piece of evidence in a trial where everyone else had forgotten the crime. He began to wonder if his own mind was playing tricks on him, or if the universe had suddenly developed a leak, letting pieces of reality slip through the cracks. As our minds usually do, though, being unable to explain the reasoning in any way that made any kind of sense, Cal's brain stepped in and came to an alternative conclusion. He decided he was probably just tired, or perhaps he had momentarily zoned out. He turned his gaze toward the front of the bus, watching the driver, a stoic man with a jaw like a granite block and eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing all at once. As they left the city limits, the skyscrapers surrendered to the sprawling suburbs, which eventually dissolved into the golden, shimmering expanse of the desert. The heat began to press against the windows, turning the glass into a magnifying lens for the sun. Cal's attention was drawn to a young boy in the third row. The kid was fidgeting, kicking his legs and playing with a small plastic dinosaur. Cal watched him for a full minute, admiring the intensity with which the boy imagined his T-Rex battling an invisible foe. Then, Cal glanced at the Maps app on his iPhone, that trusty sidekick to every person on the planet, to see how far they had come. When he shifted his eyes back to the third row, the boy was gone. The plastic dinosaur didn't remain on the seat. The small indentation in the blue fabric where the boy had been sitting vanished instantly, as if the seat had never been occupied at all. "What the fuck?" Cal whispered. He felt a surge of mild panic. This wasn't just people moving, it was an erasure. He turned to the woman sitting behind him, a college student with oversized headphones and a notebook balanced on her knee. "Did you see that?" Cal asked, his voice rising. "The little boy in the third row? He just vanished." The girl pulled one side of her headphones down, looking at him with a blank expression. "Who?" "The boy, with the dinosaur." She looked around the bus, which was now noticeably less crowded, though she didn't seem to realize it. "I don't know who you mean, Cal. There's only a few of us on here." Cal froze. How does she know my name? He realized they had introduced themselves briefly when boarding, but the fact that she felt the bus was only a few suggested that while he was tracking the disappearances, everyone else was losing their memory of who had been there in the first place. Cal looked around. To his horror and disbelief, he found the young lady was right. It wasn't just the elderly lady and the little boy. More than half of the original occupants were gone. When the bus pulled away from the station, there were north of 40 people. Now there couldn't be more than a baker's dozen. To everyone else on the bus, the world was shrinking, but to them it felt complete. To Cal, the world was leaking, and the leak was growing. As the bus pushed deeper into the desert, the landscape became a study in ochre and gold. Sagebrush tumbled across the road and distant mesas rose like sleeping giants against a bruised purple sky. The silence inside the bus began to grow, not because people were being quiet, but because there were fewer voices to fill the space. Cal started testing the phenomenon. He would pick a person, stare at them intently, and then intentionally look away for 3 seconds before looking back. He picked a businessman in a sharp charcoal suit. Look away, 1, 2, 3, look back. The man was gone. No briefcase, no tie, no lingering scent of peppermint. He picked a teenage girl chewing gum with rhythmic intensity. Look away, 1, 2, 3, look back, gone. Not even a single bubble of pink gum remained on the floor. It became a haunting rhythm. The bus was like a slow-motion magic trick. Every time Cal shifted his focus, the universe claimed another soul. The macabre part wasn't just the vanishing, it was the indifference of the survivors. He watched as 2 women who had been chatting animatedly suddenly changed to a single woman sitting quietly with a perplexed look, like someone who walked into a room but forgot what it was she came into the room for. Then he looked away. 1, 2, 3, and she was gone too. Where are they going? Cal wondered aloud. He looked at the driver. The driver didn't speak much, but he drove with a steady, unwavering precision, as if he were navigating not just a road, but a countdown. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the desert in streaks of crimson and violet, the bus had become cavernous. The echoes of the engine seemed louder now that there were fewer bodies to absorb the sound. A cold, creeping dread began to coil in Cal's stomach, tight as a rusted spring. He looked at the driver, the stoic, granite-jawed man who was currently the only thing standing between them and a catastrophic collision with a desert mesa. What if he goes? The thought hit Cal like a physical blow. If the driver vanished mid-turn or while cruising at 60 miles per hour, would the bus simply glide to a gentle stop, or would it become a runaway silver bullet hurtling blindly into the scrubland with no one at the helm to steer them home? Then came the more intimate terror, the fear of his own erasure. Cal looked down at his hands, half expecting them to be translucent, as if he were already beginning to fade. What if he was next? He imagined himself winking out of existence in a sudden, silent flash, leaving behind nothing but an empty seat and a lingering sense of absence that no one else would even notice. The thought was dizzying, the idea that he could vanish not just physically, but conceptually. If he disappeared now, who would remember the woman in saffron or the boy with the dinosaur? He was the sole keeper of the bus's history. If he went, the history went with him. His chest tightened, his breath coming in short, jagged sips of air. He felt a panic attack simmering just beneath the surface, a storm of anxiety threatening to break and swallow him whole. To combat it, Cal gripped the armrests of seat 12C until his knuckles turned white, grounding himself in the tactile reality of the vibrating plastic. He forced himself to count, 1, 2, 3, trying to anchor his mind before he drifted away into the same void that had claimed the others. Cal looked at the man in the flannel shirt, the one who had been his neighbor since the start. They had spent the last hour talking about their lives, or rather, Cal talking, and the man reacting to a world that was steadily emptying. "I think we're down to just us," Cal said, gesturing to the vast stretches of empty blue seats. The flannel-shirted man looked around, blinking. "Just us? I mean, yeah, it's a quiet ride. Just me, you, and the driver." Cal sighed. The man had forgotten about the woman in saffron, the boy with the dinosaur, the businessman, and the girl with the headphones. To him they hadn't vanished. They had simply never existed. Cal looked away to check the scenery, a lone Joshua tree standing like a sentinel against the wind. When he looked back, the flannel-shirted man was gone. The seat was pristine, no crumbs from the granola bar the man had been eating, no imprint of his heavy frame in the cushion, just an empty space where a friend had been. Now it was just Cal and the driver. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, almost physical. It pressed against Cal's eardrums like he was underwater. He felt small. No, that's not right. He felt microscopic inside the humming metal belly of the bus. He stood up, his footsteps echoing through the aisle. He walked toward the front, peering over the driver's shoulder. The road ahead was a straight ribbon of black asphalt cutting through the shimmering heat haze of the desert. "How many more stops?" Cal asked. The driver didn't turn his head, but his voice was deep and resonant, like a cello played in a cathedral. "One more scheduled stop, Calvin." Cal shivered. The driver knew his name too, but not just the name he introduced himself by, but his given name. He whispered it back to himself, Calvin. But did the driver remember the others? "Do you remember them?" Cal asked. "The people who were here? The woman in the yellow sweater? The boy?" The driver finally turned, a small, enigmatic smile touching his lips. His eyes were an ancient shade of blue, like the deepest part of the ocean. "Remember who, Calvin?" Cal felt a surge of existential vertigo. Was he the only one holding on to the ghost of the crowd, or was the driver playing a game? "The passengers!" Cal exclaimed. "We started with more than 40 people. Now it's just us." The driver chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "It's always been just you and me, kid. You've got a vivid imagination." Cal sat back down in seat 12C, but the seat felt larger now, as if it were expanding to accommodate his growing loneliness. He realized that he was the archivist of this journey. He was the only one keeping the records of who had been there. If he forgot them, would they truly be gone? Or did the vanishing happen first and the forgetting follow? As the bus continued its trek, Cal began to notice something strange about the light. The desert wasn't just getting darker, it was becoming more vivid. The oranges were deeper, the purples more royal. The world felt as though it were sharpening, focusing in on a single point. Then, the brakes hissed. The bus slowed with a rhythmic groan, pulling off the highway and into a small, dusty turnout. A weathered sign, swinging precariously from a rusted pole, read, last chance gas and grub. It was a lonely outpost, a small square building, with a flat roof and two ancient pumps standing like sentinels out front. The paint was peeling in long, curled strips of white and red, and the surrounding desert stretched out in every direction, an endless sea of sand and scrub. The bus came to a complete halt. The engine sighed into silence, leaving a ringing void in the air. "Scheduled stop," the driver announced. "Stretch your legs, Calvin." Cal stood up slowly. He felt a strange hesitation, a fear that if he stepped off the bus, he might vanish himself. But curiosity won out. He descended the steps, his boots crunching on the dry, alkaline soil. As he stepped onto the pavement of the gas station, he stopped dead. The silence was absolute. There were no birds chirping, no wind whistling through the brush, no distant hum of other cars. It was a silence so profound it felt like a weight. He looked toward the gas station building. The door was propped open with a wooden block, inviting him inside. Cal walked toward it, his footsteps sounding unnaturally loud. Inside, the store was a treasure trove of frozen dinners, bags of chips, and dusty bottles of soda, but there was no one behind the counter. No clerk, no customer, not even a stray dog. He wandered through the aisles, noticing that everything was perfectly placed. A row of candy bars stood in military precision. The coffee pots were still steaming, sending plumes of aromatic brown vapor into the air. It looked as though the inhabitants had been there a second ago, as if someone had just stepped out of frame. Cal walked to the window and looked out at the surrounding area. He saw a rusted pickup truck parked by the pumps, its driver's side door wide open. A half-finished cup of coffee sat on the roof of the truck, still steaming slightly. But there was no one. No people in the store, no people by the trucks, no people in the distance. The world had been emptied. A sudden chill raced down Cal's spine. He realized that the vanishing hadn't stopped when the bus did. It had expanded. The erasure had leaked out of the bus and swallowed the rest of the world. "Hello?" he shouted. His voice echoed, bouncing off the walls of the store and returning to him, sounding smaller than it should have. "Is anyone here?" No answer. Just the steady drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet in the back of the store. Cal felt a sudden, desperate need for companionship. He turned around and hurried back toward the bus, his heart hammering against his ribs. The big silver vehicle looked like a sanctuary, a metal island in a sea of nothingness. He climbed back up the steps, expecting to see the driver waiting for him at the wheel, ready to propel them toward whatever destination lay ahead. But as he reached the top step, Cal stopped. The driver's seat was empty. Cal stared at the steering wheel. There were no footprints in the dust on the floor, no discarded hat, no lingering scent of old tobacco. The driver had vanished. Cal stood in the center of the aisle, surrounded by rows of empty blue seats. He looked back at seat 12C, his seat, and realized that for the first time he wasn't sure if he was still there. He looked down at his hands. They were solid, but they seemed to shimmer slightly at the edges, as if he were becoming a sketch of himself. He closed his eyes and thought of everyone who had been on the bus. He pictured the woman in the saffron cardigan, the boy with the dinosaur, the man in the flannel shirt. He held on to them tightly in his mind, refusing to let the erasure take their memory. When he opened his eyes, he looked at the empty driver's seat. He didn't see anyone there, but as he stared, he noticed something. On the dashboard, where the driver's hand had been resting just moments before, there was a single, small object that hadn't vanished. It was a silver pocket watch. Cal stepped forward and picked it up. He clicked the latch open. The second hand wasn't ticking clockwise. Instead, it was moving backward. As Cal watched the hand sweep back through the seconds, he felt a strange sensation, a feeling of fullness returning to the air. He looked around the bus and gasped. Slowly, like a film being played in reverse, the passengers began to reappear. First, the flannel-shirted man materialized in seat 13C with a blink. Then, the girl with the headphones shimmered into existence behind him. The boy with the dinosaur popped back into the third row, mid-roar. One by one, they filled the void, their laughter and chatter returning to fill the silence. Finally, with a sudden whoosh of air, the driver reappeared at the wheel, his hands gripping the steering wheel as if he had never left. The driver looked at Cal through the rearview mirror and winked. "Ready to keep going, Calvin?" Cal smiled, clutching the pocket watch in his palm. He didn't know what type of phenomenon had transpired over the last few hours, or what had caused this all to happen. But he knew beyond any shadow of a doubt this was the happiest he'd ever been in his life. He rode this bus to escape the people of the city, but he knew now how truly important having other people were. He thought about clinging to the memory of each and every one of those precious souls as they vanished one by one. He knew the universe had gifted him a very valuable lesson today, and he intended to hold it close for the rest of his life. The bus hissed, the doors folded shut with a rhythmic snap, and they rolled forward once more into the golden heart of the desert. No longer just a collection of strangers, but a single living organism moving toward home. As Cal took his place in seat 12C next to the man wearing the flannel shirt, he smiled the most genuine smile he's ever felt cross his features and watched the desert roll by, confident that nobody was going anywhere.
Well, friends, there you have it. Another trip into my imagination completed. Be sure and tune in next week as we venture into the backwoods of northern Michigan. In the meantime, be sure and check out my lighthearted comedy music, including my most recent album, This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things by Bone Daddy and the Boneyard Buffoons, available on all the major streaming platforms. But for now, this is Bone Daddy saying leave a night light on and never stop wondering what really goes bump in the night.
This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons living or dead or actual events is purely coincidental. Copyright 2026, Jason Connor and Bone Media Group, all rights reserved.